Hello and welcome to episode 3 of my D&D class thing that I've been doing now. So, this is going in alphabetical order. We finally moved from B's to C's, which means clerics. Now, clerics are an interesting bunch, as unlike other classes, with a few exceptions, they are very much based on one particular thing for the most part, but I'm gonna try to find ways to make it interesting, as well as give you an overview of that. Now, I bet you're thinking what they're based on. Well, it's very, very obvious. They're heavily based on Christianity. More specifically, the Catholic Church, by a lot. Like, you would have to know nothing about that to not pick up on the similarities. They're kind of obvious. But that's not a bad thing. But I'm going to go over the history of why we consider clerics and play around with them. So, where better to start than the past? Of the past. The Stone Age. We're going to be here a lot in this series. So, honestly speaking, I can't really think of where clerics would show up in the Stone, so that's Neolithic Age. They're just kind of, at this point, due to how D&D lore / mechanics work, they're pretty much just druids at this time. The one and the same, really, at this point. They don't really do much of anything. I guess the only time you would be able to find a significant difference in D&D terms is if they were starting to become organized in some variety. But realistically, people, there is no difference at this point in society. So, if you're running a Stone Age campaign, you might have to consider that a bit if you ever do that. I don't know who has done that. Put it in the comments if you have. But after that, we can now go to a time where the actual were mainly the cults / clerics / society / religious temples, or whatever you want to call them, of the Greek Roman days. Those times, as I feel, those are where the ideas of a cleric can actually start showing up. As, they were people who gave offering to the gods, or at least what they believed were the gods at the time. For a good harvest, they kept the temples running. They would go out, kind of spread it, though that was more Christianity later on. But they were definitely the beginnings of what I would consider a cleric. And they have a very interesting aspect that the clerics, based mostly on the Catholic thing, do not have. Is that, since they worshipped the Greek / Roman pantheons, they believed in the other gods, they just didn't really worship them, or at least not to the same degree. This follows much more how D&D religion and lore tends to work. So that would be something I believe they definitely took inspiration from, just because in D&D you generally don't see players or NPCs arguing if this god or that god is real. That's just not something that happens in D&D. Unless your player's kind of weird. I'm sure there are settings that have done that kind of thing, but nothing I can think of off the top of my head. But, once again, I could be wrong there. I think maybe that might happen in Eberron, but I'm not sure. But overall, you would have, the cult dedicated to Zeus, or Mars, or even, yes, I'm mixing around the Greek and Roman pantheons a bit. That's just how this is gonna roll, because in this, as far as purposes here, they're pretty much interchangeable. But you will see quite a bit. They would go out, they'd maintain the temples, they would try to do their best. They would heal people when they can, keep the temples up and running, all that jazz. That kind of stuff. There isn't too much to talk about here without going into just talking about the Romans, which is fine, but not really for this video, but that's kind of how they work, and you get the idea of how it goes. Now, to where we all wanted to be, the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages. The time when technology pseudo-regressed, and it was just a mess for about 1,000 or so years, give or take, before we went back to the Enlightenment, true progress was being made again. As you do. Okay, so, sorry about that, I had to cut the video or recording for a second there. But, as the Dark Ages were, they were a time of the fall of Rome, and they were, of course, medieval kings. Wait, why am I doing a dark overview of the Dark Ages? You all know this. But, as far as clerics go, which I'm just going to refer to now as the Catholic Church, because that's basically what it is for the next 1,000 years, give or take. So, as the Catholic Church goes, there's a pretty obvious example of taking inspiration, and it should not be forgotten about here. But, it's very important to realize that, number one, the Catholic Church as we know it is a little bit different than how we know than back then than what it was now. Not too much, but you would notice differences. First things first, now this is a bit of a historical lesson here, there wasn't Protestantism as we know it. That's a Renaissance thing. Now, to those who aren't in the know, now, the Christianity is divided into some subgroups. This is a horrible oversimplification, but in general, the three main groups are Catholics, Protestant, and Orthodox in that order. This is not a super detailed listing, but today we're focusing on the Catholics here for inspiration, as I'm sure the Orthodox, but I think, as far as I know, they'd be roughly the same as far as cleric inspiration, but, don't at me. You can just go and, go look up Russian history. Maybe I'll do that sometime for this. I don't know. But maybe I'll do, classes of the world. That's not the one. But, for the sake of now, something you have to know is that something you may not know entirely is that not all Christians, not at least now, follow the Catholic Church. Those are what we could know as Protestants, as I would know. But today we're calling it Catholics who follow the Catholic Church. They believe they work for the Pope and such. They will occasionally and such pray to angels and Saint Mary and other saints for some reason. Yeah, I'm giving a horrible oversimplification and not necessarily much detailed explanation, as I am not Catholic and Protestant, so I don't know the inner workings of it terribly well. But I'm just going to give you the overview, because that's really all that you need to know, because any version you'd ever play with any of the ideas I give you are probably going to be very loose affixations. Unless your DM is really willing to go into detail on this, which, good point for him for being determined. But, as far as you can go, an idea is that you have to remember that the clerics were very important in the Dark Age society. Very important. After all, they had the message from God and such. You don't want to mess with God, because unlike today, most people in Europe at the time were Christian. That was just the norm. Now, what they might believe in might be a little bit different, but they were almost all Christian, so it wasn't exactly like that guy. It's not exactly some guy that believes in a faith that you don't believe in telling you some vague threat. It's the guy who talks to God telling you that you need to stop doing something. People take that very seriously, and even if you're atheist or something and don't believe in that kind of thing, you can understand if someone, at least you think, is in communication with a higher power that can send you to any afterlife they want, you would probably listen to them, just because. Now, they weren't always tyrannical with this, I don't think, at least. Well, they weren't all the time. But the point is, they commanded a lot of respect for that reason, and the fact that, someone in talking to the angels is probably someone worth keeping on good terms with, just to be in good grace with the man upstairs, as one does. But they also didn't just boss around people. It's very important. They didn't just do that. Another thing they did, which is very overlooked, is they maintained they maintained old knowledge. They maintained knowledge that, if it wasn't for the Catholic Church, would have been lost after the Dark Ages. Tons of stuff from the Romans we would not know if not for the Catholic Church preserving these bits of knowledge. It's very important to remember they helped and they led to speeding up what would become the Renaissance, keep getting us out of the Dark Ages that much quicker. So, contrary to popular belief, they were not keeping people in the Dark Ages, they were leading out of it. And they were occasionally funding researches and expeditions and such to learn more about the past and such. They were often kept scientists and such. That's very important, something you have to remember here, is that they were not keeping people in the Dark Ages, they were doing everything in their power to maintain the knowledge. Something most people forget about today. It's honestly kind of sad. Another thing they did was, of course, handle religious matters, trying to figure out doctrine and such like that, and is this thing holy to do, which is very important in a religious society, because someone has to do that, and they were conveniently positioned to do that because that was their job. Another thing they would do is obviously try to deal with curses, exorcisms, other things of that nature, and of course trying to heal people. Now, of course, this was in the time where we get some, not always, now of course, their ability to help was limited at times due to the lack of technology and proper training, but they provided a very, very serious service, and this is where we get to more questionable actions. This is more specifically to the Catholic Church, as other groups don't tend to do, as other groups of Christianity don't do this. But the whole paying to get into heaven, or paying to the church, or paying off sins kind of thing, that was not something that people like much in nowadays. I'm not sure what people would have thought about back then. Probably mild annoyance, I imagine. Or, I mean, after all, if someone told you that you just had to pay $10 to get into heaven, I'm pretty sure most people would fork over those $10. I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to do. Now, as far as that goes, I'm not sure you incorporate that into a D&D game, although it would be infinitely hilarious to see a cleric who, every time the player did something out of their alignment, or whether the cleric's or the player's alignment, or at least out of the good alignment or something, would then demand payment to pay off the sin. That would be kind of funny to see. It would get annoying, but if the player played it right, it would be kind of funny to see. It would depend on the game, though. I imagine I prefer it in a more lighthearted game, as I think in a more dark and gritty game, it would just get irritating. Probably also a game where money's common. That would be important. Though, all that could be fun. Now, of course, people nowadays would view the whole paying for penance would be less happily viewed, though, of course, this is in the age where Protestantism exists, which is kind of the looser cousin of Catholics, but that's not important. But back then, that was a thing that people did. They would also do confessions, which is very so much done today. You know, where they would confess their sins to that person, which I imagine would make an excellent start for a cleric to get into an adventure, where a player has seen something or has done something that starts the adventure, and that's how they learn about it. But that's when we move to Clerics on the Go section, as I have written in my notes here. But overall, this is less specific to the Catholic Church, as this was more just Christians doing our Christian things, of course, trying to spread the message, spreading the grace of God. That's something we enjoy doing, at least some of the time. But overall, this is something they would do, where they'd show up to regions of paganism, or other things like that, and try to convert them. Now, we have to remember, this wasn't always hostile. In fact, most of the time it wasn't. Hostile things were just not something that was very preferred. Now, granted, if there was part of a war, it might be done slightly more hostilely, but the Catholic Church would often just try to convert people peacefully. There wasn't always a means for violence. This is something I don't know how you incorporate into a D&D game, but at this point I'm pretty sure this is just turning to a talk on the Catholic Church during the Dark Ages. A heavily simplified view, but still something, but still. But overall, the influence of the Catholic Church kind of waned in some places after the birth of Protestantism, because quite a few places became quite Protestant, which means that the influence of the Catholic Church was wane in those areas because, Protestants don't care about the Pope. But overall, they did, of course, there were definitely, Catholic Church in the New World, and they would try to, of course, convert the Native Americans and South Americans and all that jazz, as you do. Though, once again, there was kind of more Protestants, as Protestants were quite left to the New World quite a bit, because they didn't like quite being persecuted a bit in Europe and such, so they came to the New World, which is why America's heavily Protestant. But overall, that did happen to someone. Now, in the modern day, a cleric, I don't really know where you put that. I mean, just kind of modern Catholic Church, really. Maybe, that would be a good example, preferably with less claims of, child abuse. That would be very much preferred. And, of course, you can just look at the Pope nowadays if you just want an example of the hierarchy would look like. And as far as the future goes, robot clerics. I don't need to explain that. Robot clerics. Just no explanation needed whatsoever. And of course, you got the generic, Imperium of Man, Cult of the Emperor kind of stuff from 40K. That's always a good example. Just modern things surviving as they do kind of things. And to kind of give the wrap-up / overview of this whole thing, something I think clerics should do a little bit more is that I would imagine they would often have to deal with more hierarchies and such. They aren't necessarily like paladins who just kind of follow a code and go out. They have hierarchies of, this rank, the next rank up until you presumably get to the top of the metaphorical pyramid, or temple. But overall, there is something to remember. There's a lot of stuff you can learn by looking through history, though the cleric class is heavily based on the Catholic Church, which is why I spent so much time talking about them. They're very much breached into that one place. But, of course, it's not like there are no other examples, and there's more you can play with by playing around with the inspiration. So, always think about what you're going to do with your character. But overall, now it's time for me to leave. Next video will be on the Druid, which means we're going to have to fight some hippies. See you then.